Good morning. It's April 14th, 2022, and this is to my liberal friends. You know, the question that should be on all of our minds is how far can Biden's approval rating slip? This was a guy that was supposed to be so popular. He was the guy that was going to negotiate with Congress. He was going to be the moderate while he was in office. Well, I guess none of that's working out for him. Last July, Biden had approval rating of 48%. Now, that's not a great rating, but by today's standards, it probably is. By December, he was at 41%. In a CNBC poll this week, he was down to 38%. And 53% of Americans disapproved of what he was doing. So when you see that happening, you'd think the president would have some plans, some reaction, or some solution to the problem. So what do to change public opinion? Instead of coming up with a real solution, they blame everybody but themselves. First, it was Donald Trump. Everything wrong with the economy, the COVID response, the immigration crisis, the supply chain mess, all that was a result of failed policies by Donald Trump. They were going to fix it, but you should always remember, it was Donald Trump's fault, not theirs. And then gas prices started rising at a rapid rate. The supply chain mess only got worse, and inflation came rocketing in at numbers we haven't seen in a generation. Some of us are old enough to remember that old saying that President Harry Truman loved to use, the buck stops here. And by that he meant if things went wrong, it was his fault and it was his job to fix them. Not simply blame someone else, not seeing much of that coming from the Biden camp. Not seeing him saying the buck stops with him. When I was a lot younger, a singer named Shirley Ellis came along with a song called The Name Game. She went through a lot of different names with her little ditty. I suspect that in the White House, someone knew that song and they have turned it into the blame game. As I said, at first it was Trump, and even Shirley Ellis used the name Donald in her song. We all thought she should have used the name Chuck. Jen Psaki could not say Trump enough in her press briefings. After a year, the public did not want to hear about Trump anymore. They didn't want to hear about the previous administration's problems. They wanted results. And they blamed inflation on some transitory effect in the economy and said it would go away in a few months. We heard Jen Psaki say that. We heard Biden say it. We all know how that worked out. Not only did it not go away, it kept on rising. Food prices were going up, and the result was greedy producers, according to the Biden administration, greedy producers in the food chain. Not anything that Biden did would cause inflation. Gas prices kept going up, and it was the big oil companies that were blamed at first. Nobody in the Biden administration. He was going to solve that by releasing oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That's like pouring a glass of water into one of the Great Lakes. It's not going to be a solution, and eventually you're going to have to replace that oil. And so what's the point? Gas prices are up at the highest we've seen them in decades. Then Russia invaded Ukraine, and suddenly Biden and his minions in the White House had the villain they've been looking for. Vladimir Putin was to be blamed for everything and anything that was wrong in the economy and anything else in the country. He was the big bad wolf that had costed Little Red Riding Hood. Jen Psaki has now inserted the name Putin where she used to say Trump. Putin is to blame for high gas prices, even though they had risen well before the invasion of Ukraine. Putin was to blame for inflation, even though inflation was on the rise well before the invasion. Putin's to blame for the supply chain mess. Putin's to blame for everything. He's the villain in this and not Joe Biden. And so what does the administration propose? We haven't heard any real solutions. But here's a fact. When you pump trillions of dollars into the economy with all these stimulus checks, and Democrats are now crying out for another one, you're causing inflation. I guarantee you're causing inflation. That's one of the big problems. One of the solutions would be to say, hey, we got to stop infusing money into the economy. We got to have a solution. And so every person should be asking themselves, what can I do to not spend as much? Because you're not going to have much to spend. The Fed's going to raise interest rates by 50 basis points next month, and you can count on another 50 real shortly after that. That's how they're going to tame inflation. They're going to slow down the economy. It's the only way. But Biden will blame that on somebody else, not him. This has been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening.